Hashanah Tova, this is already going to be online, but as part of the larger second day of Rosh Hashanah davening, this is what I hope to be able to say come the second day of Rosh Hashanah, which is, all of 72 hours away or something like that. So when I was growing up in Kenosha, Wisconsin, like any good teenager, I'd always complain that nothing ever happened there. Which was sort of true, which is sort of the point of Midwestern towns. Almost to prove the point, every year for the last 15 years when my family and I would go to visit my parents, we'd ride on the electric streetcar line. Now, the streetcar is new, which means it's 20 years old, but it wasn't there when I was a kid. It's built on the ruins of the old AMC automobile plant, a plant partially built in the 1890s, but which was somehow still in operation when I was in high school. So when they finally tore down the auto plant and somehow remediated the polluted land, Kenosha spent millions to build a 2-mile streetcar loop for a trolley to circle the long depressed downtown. So that's what we do. We go to Kenosha and ride in endless loops from nowhere to nowhere. Now, my family is frequently the only passengers on this trolley when we make the destinationless trip. And the only truly memorable moment was when we rode past the courthouse one year and Mom mentioned, to our surprise, that she worked there as a social worker for a short time in the early 70s. Now, you might have seen the courthouse in the news, boarded up and surrounded by National Guard troops, though my eyes were drawn to the protesters standing on the now dormant trolley tracks. The Kenosha trolley to nowhere used to be a handy, cute metaphor for my hometown, but now it feels just a little tragic. Symbol of a town, or maybe a culture, caught in an endless loop instead of moving forward. It's more than a little tragic. The endless loop of our times, a video of a shooting in Kenosha's case, Jacob Blake last month, followed by protests and controversy, peaceful protests and destructive riots, more shootings, politician visits, and then the debate dies down and moves on until we get back on for another ride around the circle. But we've been on this ride before, and we all know that if we keep going in the same loop, we're never going to get anywhere new. And that goes for all the other signs of strain in our society. Despite the many, many blessings and good things of our time, data shows an increase in reported cases of depression and anxiety among adults and teenagers, increased reports of suicide attempts and suicide, increased drug overdoses. Recent years have seen a decrease in American life expectancy as opioid abuse increases and too many fall through the cracks of our healthcare system, and all of this is from pre-pandemic data. It's hard to imagine that it's any better now. It's clear that many feel alienated from society, and rather than seeking the good for themselves and others, they turn inward or seek to further only their own interests or the interests of people like themselves. And the effects of feelings of alienation are evident. The rise of far-left movements, of far-right movements, and political movements, again, right and left, that seek not to help Americans, but only Americans who share their worldview. Now, there are always complex causes, and I minimize none of them, and do not claim that there are any simple solutions. And still, we can see some of the thread that runs through all of these issues is a sense of alienation. Feeling like we don't have a stake in the larger project of life feeds a sense of injustice, despair, and turning inward. And like a Kenosha trolley, there's no way to break out of that loop to nowhere. And Jewish thought is predicated on the idea that we can and must move forward. We're supposed to build towards a redeemed world. The point of the shofar is to wake us up, to break us out of our existing patterns and put us on a different track. Now, there are key moments in the Jewish narrative that help to show the way out of the endless loop. Those are things we should think of now. Think of the moment when, in the midst of Pharaoh's harsh decree of death to the Israelite boys, Bat Paro, Pharaoh's daughter, knowingly and deliberately disobeys her father and obeys her conscience. V'tiftach v'tira'u et hayeled, and she opened the basket and she saw the boy, v'hinei na'ar bocheh, v'tachmol alav, and the kid was crying, and she had mercy on him. V'tomar yodei evrim zeh, And she said, "This is one of the Hebrew children." She knows it's one of the despised, cursed other. But common human feeling overrides societal hate. That's where redemption begins. That's where breaking the endless loop begins. When we, like Moses' mother Yocheved, believe that there is someone downriver who has the spine to disobey immoral orders, and when we, like Bat Paro, default to mercy and love rather than taking the easy way out, decency and truth start the road to redemption. Pharaoh's fears and bigotry lead to nothing but disaster. So I think the lesson of Bat Paro is pretty clear when applied to the need for greater justice for Black Americans. These holidays ask us to admit our faults, not to get defensive, and we should all assume that we have some anti-racism work to do. I include myself in that. And there's more to our American story of the last year. Wendy Ferencz, Moshe Deutsch, and Douglas Miguel Rodriguez were all murdered in an anti-Semitic attack in Jersey City in a kosher supermarket on December 10th, 2019. The killers presumably had their eyes on the Jewish school next door as well, but were pinned down by a diverse array of law enforcement agencies in a long, dangerous standoff. And the heroism of police that day saved untold lives, and if you remember how they did it, it was partly with the help of the military-style equipment that some departments now have. It was a similar story in Pittsburgh in October 2018, when officers confronted the shooter in the Tree of Life Synagogue. Our ethical obligations absolutely call on us to ensure that Black lives matter. And the knowledge that so very, very many good cops risk their lives protecting us when Jews of any color gather means we can't fall into the trap, some do, of anti-police sentiment. We are to hold these two non-conflicting truths at once. The blessings of justice and prosperity and fairness are to be applied everywhere and to everyone, with special attention to the especially vulnerable, as the Torah frequently commands us to do. Our language, our choices, all must reflect a rejection of narratives which reduce people to stereotypes. Treating people as people is one step to helping lift the underlying alienation that undergirds so many of our society's problems. And this Rosh Hashanah, if we remember how we have failed to do and how we can do better these things, we'll be moving in the right direction. One other key story from the Torah. When the Israelites scout out the land of Israel, most of them come back saying that the land is too well defended and any attempt to enter it will fail. The people wail and complain, declaring that they should all go back, romanticizing the past, and saying that life in Egypt was better than this foolish mission from the desert wilderness to the promised land. And then God finally loses patience and says that they will indeed never make it to Israel, that they'll wander in the desert until a new generation arises. What's up with that punishment? Why are they left to die in the desert? My colleague Rabbi Sharon Brous explains the message clearly. If you only express despair, if you cannot at least hope for a better life, you will never make it out of the wilderness. The people who cannot envision a better future, but only want to return to the bad old days in Egypt, they will never make it to the promised land. To move forward requires a sense of hope in the possibility, however unlikely, that the future can be better than the past. That is what is required of us. Hope. A desire for a future that rises above our past and a desire to work for it. Otherwise, a parched, harsh desert will be the only world we ever see, cursed to circle it till we drop from exhaustion. But hope and dedicated action can get us out of the wilderness. It is not guaranteed. Who knows how long it will take? Who knows what it will take? But we cannot give up on a fair, more just future. It's right in what be our Haftorah for Rosh Hashanah Day 2 morning. Al tikva la'acharataych. There is hope for your future, says the prophet Jeremiah. Tifchi arelam l'sason. And I will turn their mourning into joy. We know what's required of us. We need to get out of the endless loops of our old ways. We need to see the world with Yocheved, Moshe's mother's eyes, never losing hope that there's a tzaddik or a tzaddiket out there to save her child, and with Bat Paro's eyes, seeing people as people, respecting who they are, and treating them with the care and dignity we want for our own families to be treated with. And to remember that moving forward requires a sense of hopefulness. Jews, so often excluded across history, know what happens when a society loses its moral bearings. There are real threats to our society, and we have to be grounded enough in the best of the Jewish tradition to spot them and counter them. One blessing of knowing the long history of the Jewish people is knowing that we have long overcome difficult situations, often in more daunting circumstances than our own. We are a strong people, descended from strong people, and we know our covenant commands us to be rodfei shalom, pursuers of peace. And in the year to come, we will not shirk that task. Because I know when I can make it back to my hometown, I'll get to hop on the trolley again, and it'll take me on that loop, past places that are now the worse for the wear. There's no way around that. The only question I can ask myself is that if I am doing enough to break out of my negative loops. We all have to ask ourselves that question. May we be blessed next year to gather back together in this place, together, shoulder to shoulder and hand in hand, and answer that we have started on a path of hope and look back on a year of blessing. May you and your loved ones be blessed with strength and health and compassion in the year to come. And may we all be blessed with peace and hope and answered prayers. Shana Tova.